and welcome back. So, we are going to start really understanding the mental health of our teenagers, and we're going to start with anxiety. It is one of the biggest issues that faces our teenagers at the moment. And I would be very surprised if you said to me that your teenager hadn't experienced anxiety of some level, even more surprised if you said you hadn't experienced anxiety at some level. And it's really important that we understand what the brain is doing and how it is working for our teenagers. Because if you've been in the psychology behind the behavior part of the membership, you will know their brains are very different to ours and they are not fully formed and they certainly are not fully functioning at the moment. And this is really, really important when it comes to understanding how anxiety works for teenagers and how different it is for us as adults. So let's really understand what anxiety is and what is its purpose. So, if you've been to the psychology behind the behavior part of the membership, this will look familiar to you, but just a very quick recap if you've not been there is this is our brain. This is one you're seeing here. So, you've got your prefrontal cortex, which is here at the front of the mind. And this is where our reasoning, logic, cognition happens. This is where we can figure our problems out. This is what's fully formed in an adult and not fully formed in a teenager and won't be until they hit their 20s. So we have to keep that in mind because this is what keeps us calm. Underneath that is the amygdala, the emotional bank. This is what kicks off when anxiety is kicking in, and I'll explain how in a moment. But your emotions are sat here and they pump out, and then logic comes in and helps us understand them. Now, I'm going to throw in another part of the brain here is the hippocampus. Now, your hippocampus sits around the outside of the amygdala, and it has a really important role when it comes to anxiety. So if you want to know a little bit more about how the emotion and the logic brain works, head over to the psychology behind the behavior part of the membership, and I go into much more detail here. But for this purpose, we're going to explain it in the analogy of a smoke detector because it's the best way to explain how the brain is working with anxiety. So your amygdala here, if you imagine it's the fire alarm, it's the detector, the smoke alarm that you have on the ceiling in your house. It's a smoke detector and it's there to constantly scan for threats. That's what keeps us safe. So it's constantly looking around and it will detect a perceived threat, or a real threat. So like your smoke detector at home, is probably quite unreliable. So if there's a blazing inferno going on in your house, you want that to go off, and it will. But also, if you burnt the toast, it will go off as well. So the alarm system is kind of on edge, and it's almost a bit panicky all the time. It's trying to keep you safe, so it will be kicking off. And when it perceives a real threat, if it perceives a perceived threat, if it just perceives a threat, it's going to kick off. And what it will do is it will kick the body into a flight, fight, freeze, or flop response. There are survival responses, and that's what it will kick off, even if it's burnt toast. Okay, so it's a bit scatty, if you like. The hippocampus around the outside is like the fire manual. It holds memories. It understands what's going on, and its whole purpose in anxiety is to calm the amygdala down. So the hippocampus will go, right, amygdala's kicking off, but I smell burnt toast. Therefore, it's burnt toast. We can calm down. And it calms the amygdala down. So it's acting as a support. It responds to what the amygdala is doing and then tries to add a little bit of rationalization to it. So the hippocampus holds memories. Now, in someone who is quite calm and has their anxiety under quite a manageable level, if the burnt toast goes off, if there's a perceived threat, the hippocampus can control that and calm us down. What can happen is if your teenager or yourself are experience really high anxiety, the amygdala starts pumping out adrenaline. And what adrenaline will do is flood the hippocampus so it can't logically think anything through. So it's almost like the way I describe it is like pouring a coffee over your notes. So you can still see the notes, but they're all a bit blurry. So if the amygdala is overworking and overstimulated, and I'm going to you parents, if you've got teenagers that are really anxious about school, who experience panic attacks on a daily basis, their hippocampus isn't going to be able to function because their amygdala is pumping out too many hormones and flooding the system. So if I poured it over my laptop right now, it would short circuit the whole thing. Does that make sense? So we need the fire manual as a bit of a backup to go, now hold on, I know this isn't a big threat, let's calm it down and we can understand it. If you're in a chronic panic situation or you're experiencing quite high anxiety, that's not going to work. Therefore, we need our prefrontal cortex to kick in, which is like the fire inspector, it's the fire warden. lead fire person from a fire engine. I don't know what they're called, but it's a lead fireman. And he comes in and logically calms it down. So he'll put the fire out, he'll throw the toast away, he'll do what he needs to do, or she. They do what they need to do to calm the brain down. So that's how it works. And like I've put here, so your amygdala is the alarm system. It is looking for danger because the whole purpose of the whole brain is to keep you alive. Okay, so this needs to kick up. Then you've got the responder, which is around the outside. So this is opening the manual going, no, we're all right. It's just burnt toast. Or, holy Christ, there's a massive fire going on. Let's get out. So that will inform what the amygdala needs to do. And then you've got the prefrontal cortex that will come in and just calm the whole lot down or put the fire out or just rationalize. Now, if you remember from the previous videos in the psychology part, teenagers don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. This isn't working. It's only half made. So their alarm system's going off. The hippocampus is gone because it's been flooded out because the anxiety is too much and they can't grab it. And then they come out with huge panic attacks. They can't go to school. They're feeling unwell. They don't know how to manage this because the prefrontal cortex can't come down. Me and you are sitting there going, okay, it'll be fine. We'll speak to school. We'll sort the problem out. We're doing the whole fixing. And again, go back into the previous videos around identity and around the psychology. We are trying to fix them, but they can't. It's too much for them. So that's why anxiety is such a difficult one to manage, because the brain is screaming danger, danger, danger. There's a threat, there's a perception, there's a perceived threat. Get away. And we are trying to go, it's fine, it's not going to be a problem. So we need to understand that their brains are not working that way. If your teenager is in a heightened state of anxiety, we have to let them ride that out. There is not a lot we can do in the peak anxiety, panic, freaking out that this is kicking off, because it's their instinct. And we are fighting against a very natural instinct. All we can do is offer comfort. And I will explain these in other videos, but all we can do is offer comfort and then work through a solution at the end. So the next slide explains how we can talk to teenagers about anxiety without when they're in a calmer mode. All right, not when they're in full anxiety mode. Look at my little anxiety monster. He's cool, isn't he? The anxiety monster. So when I'm working with teenagers, we objectify the anxiety, because if we can make it into a monster, and I know they're teenagers and they're not 8, but if we can make it into a monster, then we have a little bit more control over it. And the reason I've got this jumping one all over the place is because the anxiety monster is not here to hurt us. And I can't tell you how many times I hear this when I speak to parents or teenagers, especially. I just want to get rid of the anxiety. And I'm like, we can't, because it's there for a reason, and it's there to keep us safe, and it's there to keep us alive. So we have to learn how to manage the monster and how to work with him rather than against him. But look at him, he's terrified. The anxiety monster, anxiety is not here to harm us, but we run from it. All right. So its job is to protect us, even though it's massively overreacting. It's reacting like it's like the house is on fire and it's a tiny bit of burnt toast. So it's hugely overreacting. The monster isn't scary. He's scared. So if you imagine the little monster here inside here is going, danger, danger, and it's really freaking out, it's going to start we start really not liking it, and the poor thing just needs a hug. I know I sound barking mad, but we've got to start seeing it as a scared monster inside us that is just trying to keep us safe. If we ignore it, or we fight it, or we avoid it, it is going to shout louder and louder and louder. And the only way this little monster is going to calm down is by attending to it. We need to give it attention. We need to understand what the brain is trying to tell us. Something has kicked off the amygdala. Something has kicked off this anxiety monster. Even if it's a perceived threat and it's not a real one, school is a massive example of this. I'm not talking about kids that are being bullied or there's some real extreme sort of school phobias going on here. That's very different. But if you have a teenager who's just a bit anxious about going to school because they've got their maths lesson or they've had a fallout with friends, their perceived threat is this is going to be the worst day ever, because logically they can't work that out. Really what we need to do is give the attention to the monster here. What is it that's really frightening? Well, I might be on my own at lunchtime. People might laugh at me. There might be a test that I can't do. And we give that attention. And that's where we can come in, if you remember, with the comfort or solution response. We can start working with that there, because that, do you want comfort or a solution, will calm our little monster. In fact, I'll give him a name. I can't think of one right now, but give him a name. Really objectify what the anxiety is and give him an identity. In fact, I'm going to get something right now from my therapy room, and you'll all know, I hope you all know, whether you've seen this little guy off of Inside Out. I don't know if that's gone into focus or not. But I always imagine that anxiety is like him. I know there's an anxiety monster in Inside Out too, but it's scared. I don't know if that's in focus, but it's scared. And I think we have to try and teach our teenagers that anxiety is just a fear, just a fear. I'm aware that sounds a bit naff, but it is. We need to nurture and look after our anxiety. So that's how the brain is working. It's a smoke alarm system. Sometimes it gets it wrong. Majority of the times it's going to get it wrong. And our job is to help them build this bridge between the logic brain that isn't formed for them and help them understand what their anxiety is for. Again, if they're in the middle of an anxiety attack or they're really not doing too well, the only thing we can do is offer comfort. And that comes in the form of physical hugs or space or whatever they need. And that's all we can do at that time. Explain the anxiety monster and work with their anxiety when they are in a calmer space. I'll see you in the next video where we'll go into a little bit more detail about all of this.